This video is sponsored by MyMiniFactory, 3D printing models for tabletop games.
Castle Ravenloft is among the most famous of all D&D adventures. And for good reason too. The theming of a forlorn vampire in a haunted castle is a classic trope well executed. And the 5e update to the castle is the capstone of what is perhaps the best adventure for 5th edition. The sad news is you play a lot less D&D than you think. For most people, they'll never even get the chance to run Curse of Strahd to completion. So for a lot of DMs, if you want to get this classic dungeon under your belt, your best shot is to run it as a one-shot. But this can be tricky. In fact, a few years ago when I asked for some advice on Reddit, most of the replies were telling me how I shouldn't want that, which is something I hate, and I should just run Death House instead, because I couldn't possibly do Ravenloft justice in a single session. However, that opinion is ill-informed. After all, the original I6 module was a one-shot that Tracy Hickman ran for his friends every Halloween. Additionally, there is an article by Pro D&D James Hayek on D&D Beyond called Strahd Must Die Tonight, which is exactly what it sounds like, going from the castle gate to the final confrontation in a single night. It's a good read, and I'll link it in the description, below the algorithm feeding buttons. But I, of course, found my own way to do it, and I'm gonna share it with you. Unlike a lot of my other videos, this isn't gonna be persuasive in nature. I'm not gonna try to change the way that you think. Rather, I'm just gonna assure you that my friends had fun, and I'm gonna tell you what I did to run Ravenloft in 4 hours flat. I want DMs to feel confident that they can deliver an authentic take on Castle Ravenloft as a one-shot adventure. So I guess a good place to start would be to define what that even means. Overall, what we want to do is create an experience that if a player ever talks to someone else who has played Ravenloft, they will have had a similar enough experience. If our player never said the name of the adventure and never said the name of the villain, a D&D fan would be able to guess it just from their description alone. So, what are these essential elements? Number one is we need to get Strahd in the picture. Something characteristic about Strahd is that he goes after the players, rather than just waiting in the final room at the end of the dungeon. If Strahd is not taunting the PCs, then he's not really Strahd. So we have to get him in front of the players multiple times. Number two is we have to let the players explore the castle. The map itself is perhaps second only to the villain as far as iconic pieces of this adventure go. It's detailed, complex, and beautiful in its own right. We want the players to get the feeling of this labyrinthian layer, and the castle as an environment has to do a lot of the lifting in creating this gothic horror atmosphere. Another one of our goals is we have to tell the story of Ravenloft. The adventure just can't be a vampire in a spooky castle. It's the story of this particular vampire. His tragic tale needs to be communicated to and experienced by the players. And lastly is, of course, we have to get this done in a single session. We're gonna shoot for no more than 4 hours of playtime. And the best way to do that is to cut to the chase. Start the players off at the drawbridge to the castle with the wagon of the fortune teller slowly approaching. Traditionally, the adventure is started off by reading the Fortunes of Ravenloft. This faux tarot reading is used to determine certain elements of the adventure. It's one of the reasons Ravenloft is famous for its replayability. Even the DM doesn't know how the adventure is going to unfold until everyone is sitting down at the table. But running this as a one-shot where DMs are pressed for time, I think a lot of folks would be tempted to get rid of this aspect altogether. However, I think that would be a mistake. Telling the Fortunes of Ravenloft is a special ritual, unique to this particular adventure. So for that reason alone, I think it's worth including. But more than that, we're gonna tinker with the reading in order to maximize the amount of story exposition, foreshadowing, and importantly, player direction that we can squeeze out of the 10 minutes it's gonna take to do the reading. If you remember, one of our goals is to tell the story of Strahd through the adventure, and we're gonna kickstart that through the reading itself. The first Fortune of Ravenloft tells which of the players is the reincarnation of Irina, and the second fortune tells which is the reincarnation of Sergei. Rather than going through the mess of making additional NPCs, these roles are going to be played by the player characters. The way I play this is, as the characters progress through the castle, they gradually find clues and have memories from past lives revealed. But more on that later. In the original I6 module, one of the fortunes told was to determine what Strahd's goal was. He wasn't necessarily going to go after Irina. He could have wanted a gemstone that he thought the party was carrying, or to assume the body of one of the players in a futile attempt to escape the mists. Well, we're going to do a twist on that. The third fortune tells which of the PCs Strahd wants to replace. In this version, Strahd's goal is to get Irina to fall in love with him. His plan to do that is to first kill Sergei, then to subdue or capture another member of the party and swap appearances with them and replace them. Then, in disguise, he will avenge Sergei by killing Strahd, thus winning Irina's love. The way I ran this was halfway through the night the player who drew that fortune, I texted them and told them the scheme and handed them Strahd's stat block and told them to take over. This works best if in an encounter with Strahd you have the opportunity for that player to fail a saving throw and then just say, interesting. before moving on. That brings us to the final fortunes, which we are going to use as a way to give some direction to the players. Because we're on a time crunch, giving the players a clear sense of what they need to do is going to go a long way to cut down on indecision and confusion and help keep up the pace we need. These fortunes tell either where key items can be found in the castle or where Strahd is guaranteed to be. And I'm just going to come out and say it, you should stack the deck on that last one. The final encounter with Strahd should always be in the crypts. As for the items, I recommend having a number of fortunes equal to the number of players. So you may have one or more of these. I like to use these fortunes not just to tell the players what the artifacts are, but where they are. And be explicit here. We want the players to know exactly what they're looking for, and if the room they just entered is it. It will keep things moving. The magic items like the Sun Sword or the Tome of Strahd are powerful boons and famous to the adventure. And because the other players are going to have major spotlight time to the story, I like to give these items as a way to shine the light on these other players via the loot. I like to end this scene with a special bit designed to remind the players that time is of the essence. After the reading, the fortune teller points to a long line of ghosts, dead adventurers in a grim parade, who walk out from the village graveyard below to the castle and then throw themselves off the tallest tower. Unless the heroes can slay the vampire by midnight, they too will be cursed to join the March of the Dead for all eternity. Then the fortune teller fades into the mist that are slowly moving to envelop the party. Now the only way to go is across the drawbridge and into the castle. There are a lot of cool things in Castle Ravenloft, and you of course could spend several sessions savoring what's perhaps the greatest dungeon of all time. But not here, where you're going to cut a lot of material. So much so that it's better to ask, what can't we cut? What are the essential encounters that nearly every player of Ravenloft has faced? We're going to keep those and be prepared to gut the rest. The first must-have in my opinion is Strahd and the organ. The sound of the haunting music echoing throughout the Great Hall immediately sets the tone, and more importantly, it gives the player something to investigate right away. It draws them into the castle. It also draws them into Strahd's game, because after Strahd vanishes for the rest of the session, the players are going to be unsure of whether or not what they see is real. It sets that tone of unease. You're playing his game. Plus, if you don't show the banquet, how are the players supposed to make the dinner joke? I think the second must-have encounter is the Heart of Sorrows. This weird symbolic manifestation of Strahd's dark will is very conceptually evocative. I like to leave its exact nature kind of vague when the players encounter it, but they can still sense that's a very grotesque piece of magic. This can also be a very dramatic encounter. It's one of those situations with the halberds on the wall, the dizzying spiral upwards, the sickly crimson light, where the players can tell something is about to happen, but they don't know exactly what. Building up that kind of tension is one of the things that makes an encounter really memorable. Another encounter I think you really need is one with Strahd on the balcony or the ramparts. This is your opportunity to show Strahd at his most dangerous. He can climb the walls, strike, and maneuver with the threat of instant death when the heroes tumbles over the edge of the wall. I suggest you hype it up with claps of thunder, the pale of the moon, and if you remember from earlier, the constant wail of the ghosts of failed adventurers hurling themselves off of the balcony. The last counter is, of course, the crypts. This is where it all ends one way or another. As the final resting place of the coffin, the players will either slay him where he lies, or they'll be cursed to join the ranks of failed heroes when time runs out. But there is a twist. If you remember from the intro, by the time the party gets to the final chamber, Strahd should have already infiltrated the party and replaced one of their members. Unless they figured it out, the creature they're fighting down in the crypts is really just a dominated character under an illusion to look like Strahd, with instructions to kill the reincarnation of Sergei, then await death at the hands of the true Count of Barovia. Will the heroes see through the ruse? Will Irina fall in love with Strahd? Is there escape from the mist if they slay the vampire lord in his coffin? Well, that's exactly the sort of thing we play the game to find out. The map of Castle Ravenloft is a thing of real beauty, but like I said earlier, we're going to gut it. What I recommend to get the adventure done in the time allotted is to remove all the monsters, most of the traps, and all the filler content. But that sort of begs the question, right? If we are taking out most of the, forgive me, bite from the castle, how are we still going to make it interesting? Luckily from the get-go, the party has a goal of a place to reach in the castle. The locations of the artifacts are told by the fortune telling, and they correspond to the must-have encounters. That is, one of the artifacts should be at the top of the tower that houses the Heart of Sorrows, or stuck in the ramparts of one of the high walls. In between our key locations and encounters, each room takes precious time, so anything left really needs to earn its keep. And our measuring stick for this is going to be, well, we're going to look back at our goals we set, to tell the story of Strahd in an atmosphere of gothic horror. To tell the story, as the reincarnations of Irina and Sergei walk through the rooms, reveal a bit of what is happening. The classic way to do this is the characters come across a portrait that bears a striking resemblance to one of the characters. But you could also do things like Sergei's face on a coin, or a diary written in one of their own handwriting, or walking down a hallway triggers a memory from a past life. To create the vibe we want, as the players wind their way through the castle, point out dungeon dressing. Moldy couches, cold stone fireplaces, swarms of bats, even run some monsters like jump scare traps. But these should be like a one and done bit of extra enhancement, not really as the centerpiece of the session. That's what your planned encounters are for. With one exception, I think you really should have at least one random encounter where Strahd appears. Every time the players fail at something or start to dawdle or have trouble making a decision, make them roll for random encounter. If the players get the encounter before the party recovers any of the artifacts, Strahd appears, taunts them for a few rounds, and then vanishes. If instead the random encounter occurs after the players have recovered one of the tools of Strahd's destruction, when Strahd appears, he attacks with full force. This can also play to your favor in a metagame way. If after Strahd has infiltrated the party, the players roll and get a random encounter, and he doesn't show up, they'll know something's up. They'll really put them in a state of eerie unease, and it tips the players off that something's not quite right. And we need to talk about the map itself. It is a headache and a time sink for DMs to navigate that thing at the table, so don't do it. Even if you're using digital tools like a map pack with a fog of war, the desires for the players to check out every single nook and cranny is going to eat up so much time. So instead of literally navigating the map, I suggest you do it schematically, just a sketch showing which rooms connect to where, instead of trying to draw it all out square by square. This will also give you greater control as a DM. If you want to, you can indulge in some room by room dungeon crawling. But if you're running out of time, you can effortlessly remove rooms and the players will be none the wiser. This way you can cut to the chase, or in this case the crypt, without being constrained by what has been drawn out on a literal map. One final thought on navigating the castle is while exploration is good, confusion isn't. We don't want the players to end up not knowing what to do next because we have a lot of ground to cover in a short amount of time. So as a DM, be generous in your hints. And the best part of this is, it fits into Strahd's personality too. Of course he would tell the characters the best path to take. Because remember, he's been toying with them the whole time. They are his prey. Yeah, that's it. That's the video, folks. I hope you liked it. I think a lot of people try to run Ravenloft as a Halloween, and I think this will be a really useful tool. All the minis you see in this video I got from MyMiniFactory. They are like the Amazon of 3D printing models. You can find all sorts of things with a heavy emphasis on tabletop games. So if you're looking for a specific mini or piece of terrain and you have access to a 3D printer, I highly suggest you check them out. The new playtest packet for Galder's Gazetteer is in the description. I also put some artwork in there so you guys can sort of check out the progress that's being made. And I also have a $1 Patreon where I do all of my streams, all of my design docs, and really sort of get a sort of an inside look at my thinking. All of that for only $1, so make sure to check that out in the description below the like and subscribe buttons. And if you have some thoughts on how you would run Ravenloft differently, be sure to let me know in the comments below.